Under the pitiless Arizona sun, Eli Turner, a broken cowboy with nothing left to lose, fell face first into the dust. Beside him stood Silver Dust, the only soul who refused to leave. In a land where water was worth more than mercy, a horse made a choice no man dared to make. And that choice would change everything, forcing an entire town to remember what loyalty really means. He fell beneath the same sun that took everything from him. But one creature refused to let him go. The light out there didn't shine so much as it hammered. Heat came down in nails, driving through Eli Turner's hat brim into the bone behind his eyes. At 58, the strength that once swung a post mall all day had thinned to string. The Arizona basin made a tight fist around him and squeezed. He had rationed the last of his water wrong. That's what it always came to until 1:55 p.m., 10/20/2025 desert. Map. Miles to a seep, ounces in a canteen, hours before the sun turned from mercy to judgment. He'd miscounted. The cork squeaked on dry leather when he tried the canteen again. Nothing. Silver Dust stopped when Eli stopped. The old gray gelding stood with feet planted, head turned just enough that one eye could keep him in the frame. Horse sweat has its own smell, salt and metal and grass remembers, and Eli breathed it like prayer. He slid the saddle down, tugged the bit free, the leather reins looping like tired snakes. "Go on," he rasped. "Find shade." The horse didn't move. Silver Dust stepped in until Eli could feel breath on his wrist, damp and cool compared to the world. Eli's mouth was raw. His tongue felt like cotton packed with sand. A man makes a lot of promises to himself on long rides. Write that letter, stop running from faces he carries, share water if he finds it. Promises are light. Heat makes them heavy. He tried walking. Rock and shale tipped underneath him like something alive. In the far distance, mesas floated, blue as ghosts, edges wavering where the air boiled. He kept one hand light on the gelding's mane, and the horse matched him, shoulder steady against his arm when he listed. Why does a creature stay, he asked no one, when even men have walked away? There were answers in his life he didn't want. A foreman's boot heel, an auction bell, a grave cut into hardpan that took all the talk out of a house. The desert at least was honest. It didn't pretend to love you. The world tightened to circles, the circle of his hat brim, the circle of the canteen mouth, the circle of Silver Dust's dark eye. Vultures drew their own slow wheel above a map of mistakes. He meant to skirt Cedar Flats by evening and make the dry wash that sometimes held a cupful under the stones. The trail braided between creosote and prickly pear. He drifted off it without noticing. Heat unties a mind. The horse stayed close, swinging his hindquarters to put his body between Eli and the sun whenever they paused. It wasn't training. It was something learned together, day by day, along fences where shade never fell. A dry gust shouldered through the basin, gritty with far places. It lifted Eli's brim and stung the cracked corners of his mouth. He swallowed and found nothing to swallow. He could smell creosote cooking and the faint, sweet rot of a jackrabbit, gone weeks now. A fly investigated his lip. He batted it away and almost fell with the effort. He eased down on one knee, then both, and sat with his back against a stone warmed to the heart. Silver Dust's shadow slid over him, a small mercy that felt like a roof. Eli put a palm to the horse's shoulder. Old scars lay under the coat, a seam from wire, a bruise that never quite quit. "We're a pair," he said, and the skin twitched under his hand, a ripple against flies. He took off the hat and set it upside down. The inside band was white with salt. He felt foolish about the water again, the miscount. A man his age should know better than to trust a memory of an old seep in a mean, dry year. His thoughts softened at the edges and wandered where sunburned minds wander, to bunkhouse talk, to the iron stove ticking as it cooled, to a porch laugh you could live on if you could only bottle it. Silver dust blew, low and careful, and it pulled him back. The horse moved again, quartering the sun, making his own body the wall. The gelding lowered his head until the soft of his muzzle touched Eli's temple. That's how horses ask. How bad? Eli closed his eyes. Bad enough, he said. The wind came up for real, a broad thing out of the south. It had weight and taste. Heat rode in it, but also distance, the smell of country Eli hadn't walked yet. He heard the sound it made in the cholla spines, little harps of spite. And then the first tongues of dust licked off the ground, small at first, then long, then whole sheets dragged sideways. He meant to stand. His legs misread the order. He braced a hand on the rock and pushed. The rock might as well have been greased. He slid onto his palms. The grit burned his skin. Silver dust stepped back to keep the shade over him and snorted at the sky, a short, angry sound. The vultures tightened their wheel. He crawled. There wasn't anywhere to go, but crawling is what a body does when it refuses to quit in front of witnesses. His hand found the canteen again, out of habit, not hope. He shook it and heard a single cool syllable knock the leather. He put that last ounce on his tongue and didn't swallow right away. Let it sit there like forgiveness. When it was gone, the world moved farther away to make room for the loss. He thought of letters he hadn't sent, a fence line he'd left half-mended, a grave where stones never warmed because a cottonwood threw shade just so. There were worse places to lie down than under a sky like this with a good horse near. The first wall of sand hit them. It came crawling, then stood to meet the wind and find its teeth. It made a sound like a river trying to remember itself. Eli coughed and tasted stone. He pulled his bandana over his mouth. It made no difference. The air itself felt used up. Grit found his eyes anyway and wrote its own scripture there. Silver dust planted all 4 feet and lowered his hindquarters to be a brace. He put his body directly between Eli and the blow and took the sand along his flank. The horse's tail went like a flag. He stood and kept standing, and when Eli listed onto his side, the gelding pressed closer until there was no light between them. He fell beneath the same sun that took everything from him. But one creature refused to let him go, the world said. Or maybe it was only the wind through rock. Either way, Eli believed it. His thoughts loosened. Images came and left. A blue enameled cup, the ring of a hammer, the clean click of a latch that once meant a door opening. He felt the horse shiver once and then settle. He wanted to say, "You've done right," but the words stayed heavy and kind in his chest and never made the ride to his mouth. The sun leaned down and the wind leaned harder. Somewhere past the hurt in his head and the hard going of his breath, Eli Turner let go of the reins he'd been holding on the day and slipped into that soft gray place where he could hear water that wasn't there and feel cool that wasn't either. He lay on his side with his hat tipped over his face and one hand still crooked like it held a lad rope, and he dreamed the old dream of shade. The basin kept its breath. The vultures drifted, patient. The wind ran its rough hand over everything and raised a veil of moving earth. In the middle of it, a gray horse stood with legs locked and head low over a man, taking the weather that would have taken him. And then the gusts climbed another rung. The sky went the color of hammered copper, and the sound of grit on grit grew to a low grind. The horizon blurred. Somewhere, miles off, a door slammed and opened again. Silver dust lifted his head, ears hunting. He did not move. By morning, only one would be standing under that sun. The desert's roar fell back in his mind, and the way heat does, it loosened the latch on old rooms. Eli found himself walking through them, doors he'd kept shut out of habit, stepping soft like he might wake someone he loved. The first room smelled like coffee and saddle soap. Hollow Creek Ranch before it started to come apart. He'd come to Hollow Creek with nothing but a bedroll, a busted luck streak, and hands that knew fences from the grain up. The ranch sat where the grass thinned and the red ground began, a long sprawl of boards silvered by weather and a windmill that clicked like a patient clock. Dawn there was a friendly thing, dew on alfalfa, chickens arguing about nothing, a stove lid ringing when you set the kettle wrong. Work had a rhythm, you could lean into it and forget most hurts. He met Silver Dust as a 2-year-old, hip-shot and wary, bought cheap in a lot full of horses that didn't suit anyone. They said the gray had no heart, that he spooked at the creak of leather. Eli didn't blame him. Plenty of men went that way too. They gave Eli the training job because he was quiet and didn't drink much, and the owner, an old widower named Rafe Holloway, liked how Eli listened before he spoke. He started with a halter and patience. He'd stand in the round pen with the colt until the sun went low and the hills cut it into pieces, letting the horse circle. Humans push. Horses ask. You learn that or you don't stay around them long. When Silver Dust finally stepped in and put that pink-silver muzzle in Eli's palm, Eli felt something in himself settle that had been rattling since the year the fever took his wife. He didn't say her name much, not even to himself. Names hold power. Speak them too loud, and they call back the day you can't change. She was there in the way he folded blankets, in how he left a tin cup upside down on the rail so dirt wouldn't fall in. He kept her ring in a matchbox at the bottom of his war bag, and only sometimes took it out to see how it caught light. Grief doesn't empty out of a man. It just learns where to sit. Rafe's boy, Owen Holloway, started running things after his father's gout got bad. Owen wore a clean shirt when there wasn't need and liked his boots to show it. He had a foreman, Clay Murrow, the kind of man who talked loud to make up for not knowing enough. Clay could rope a steer quick but never glanced at a horse's eyes when he touched it. That told Eli most of what he needed. Spring dried in a hurry that year. Stock watered at the big trough beside the barn, the boards there worn smooth by 1,000 lips. One morning Eli came round the corner and saw Clay working a bay mare with a green saddle cinched too tight and a rawhide quirt making up for his mistakes. The mare's whites showed. She threw her head and tried to step off. Clay snapped the quirt again, more to be seen than to fix anything. Easy, Eli said, like he might say to a skittish colt. Loosen that back cinch. She can't get a breath. Clay looked up, anger quick and thin in his face. Didn't ask for a sermon. You ain't getting one, Eli said. You're getting a mouthful of common sense. Clay hit the mare again to prove who ran the place. That did it. Eli stepped in, took the quirt by the business end, and Clay found his wrist empty before he knew he'd lost it. Eli cut the cinch with his knife in one clean stroke and eased the saddle back. The mare dropped her head like she'd set down a sack. Owen walked out of the shadow then, sleeves rolled, smile the size of a knife. Problem, boys? No problem, Eli said. Big problem, Clay said, rubbing his wrist where the quirt had burned it. He cut company tack and grabbed me. Owen's smile stayed. That true, Mr. Turner? Cut a strap worth $2 to save a horse worth 100, Eli said. You can take it out of my pay. Owen's eyes were the flat brown of a bottle. I'll take it out of your bed. You can be off the property by sundown. Rafe was in the doorway behind him, leaning on a stick. He looked tired in a way that didn't come from sleep or lack of it. He didn't say a word. Leave the gray, Owen added, jutting his chin toward Silver Dust in the corral. He's branded HC twice over. House horse. Silver Dust lifted his head at his name like he knew the talk had turned. Eli could hear the windmill ticking. He could smell hay and warm iron. He opened his mouth and closed it again. Anger is a hot knife that makes a man cut more than rope. I'll be gone by sundown, Eli said, and tucked his knife away. He shouldered his war bag in the blue time of late day, when barn swallows make low arrows around your knees. He moved in the way you move when you've done it before, careful not to bump into memories. He rolled his few shirts, wrapped the matchbox with the ring, slid in a whetstone and 2 biscuits going hard. He led Silverdust out with the halter over his arm, fingers under the jaw the way the horse liked. Owen leaned on the top rail, chewing a stem like it might make him part of the country. I said, "Leave him." "You did," Eli said, and kept walking. Clay took a step forward. Rafe said, not loud, "Let him go, son." His voice had the old timbre in it for a breath, the kind that makes young men remember shadows they stood in once. Owen didn't say another word. There was an ache you get at a gate when you won't be back. The chain clanked with a particular final sound, and the road beyond the cottonwoods looked more country than a man ought to walk alone, Eli put his foot to it anyway, because pride is a stubborn mule, and sometimes it's the only one saddled. He took day work a week at a time after that, fixing what other men had fixed wrong, mending wire, doctoring a snagged hoof with what little liniment he had left. He ate beans that had soaked long enough to remember they'd been plants, and sometimes he didn't. He slept under the kind of sky that makes small men feel big, and big men feel honest. He wrote a letter he never mailed to a son who'd stopped writing him 2 winters back, folded it twice, unfolded it, and tucked it into the matchbox with the ring. Silverdust learned the sound of his sigh, and would put his chin on Eli's shoulder when it got heavy. There are kinds of bad luck that wear a face. The kind that came for Eli wore paper. He saw it first in bitter wash tacked to the post office board with a square of bent nail. The notice had new ink, and the smell of it, black, tarry, cut through the dust and bacon fat of the little street. Wanted was block-stamped at the top, and below it, in a less certain hand, Eli Turner, theft of livestock and company property, Hollow Creek Ranch. He stood there with flies sizing him for a suit. A boy selling papers looked from Eli to the sheet and back, trying to put ages together. Eli felt his jaw tighten and made it stop. Rage didn't fix ink. Owen had decided Eli leaving with the gray needed an uglier word to make it sit right in his new life. He put a thumb to the corner of the paper and felt how it tore easy. He left it where it hung. Tearing doesn't unprint a thing. He bought coffee he couldn't taste and a twist of jerky that fought back. He asked the storekeep for directions the way a man asks when he knows them anyway, just to hear another voice place his next mile. "Cedar Flats," the man said. "Dry as a sermon and twice as long." Eli turned his face toward that. He and Silverdust moved along a fence line without cattle, posts leaning like they'd tried to leave and only got halfway. The road narrowed to a thought, and then to nothing at all. Night came down like a canvas unrolling, and stars pricked through it, honest and cold. He dreamed that night of the house that wasn't his anymore. The rice jar on the shelf, the oilcloth on the table with a burned ring where she'd set a kettle too hot. He woke before dawn to the shape of the horse nearby, and a coyote's casual yip somewhere that wasn't his concern. In the morning, he found the Flats living up to their name. He'd already had a hold on the day and wouldn't be argued with. He counted water wrong and wrote that math across his body. He told himself he'd make the wash, and when he didn't, he told himself he'd make the next one. And by the time both were lies, he had the sense to take the bridle off so Silverdust could put his head where he wanted. The horse stayed anyway. By the time the gust came that turned the sky to copper and the sand to teeth, Eli had been Hawthorne, man without a bed long enough to believe he'd outlived home itself. He let go with the easy grace of someone practiced at losing. The horse refused. In town the next county over, someone else was reading that notice. Clay Murrow had slung it into his saddlebag for later use. Paper travels faster than a tired man. Clay liked the sound of the bounty offered at the bottom, liked the feel of winning twice. He turned his horse toward Cedar Flats and grinned at the sun like he'd made it. Back in the basin, Wind quit talking and started pushing. Eli's hat went from his brow to his shoulder to the ground. Silver Dust stepped quick, put a hoof on the brim, and held it there like a friend keeping a secret. The dust went thicker, the light went meaner, and somewhere in it all, Eli heard a screen door slam in his mind again, the one that had opened once and didn't since. He moved a hand that didn't feel like his and found horsehair, warm even under the blast. "Easy, old man," he meant to say. It came out as air. On the far side of the flats, a water rights fence rattled against iron posts, and a man in a clean hat counted barrels in the shade of his claim. His name was Charles Denton, and he didn't like company digging their thirst near his profits. He'd paid good money to make the law look his way when needed, and the other way if it bothered him. In the tally of men that morning, some were riding toward Eli with paper in their pockets, some were adding up water like it was coin, and one was standing in the sand, taking the day so another could keep it. Eli closed his eyes because light had turned to knives. The world narrowed to the rasp of a horse's breath and the slow pound of his own. Memory shuffled, dealt him one last card. Her laugh on a porch, wind lifting the hair at her temple, the way she said his name when supper was ready. He held it, and it held him. The gusts backed off, the heat didn't. Time, which had been a whip, went slack as an old rein. Silver Dust stood, patient as stone until the sun fell an inch. Then he lifted his head and listened again, ears cutting the wind like knives. He had a notion, some scent caught in the grit, some far-off rattle of wheels, some memory of a place where water was in the ground even when it wasn't on top. He stepped away from Eli then, one careful pace, then two, as if testing a rope he couldn't see. He looked back, the way horses do when they've made up half their mind and want you to make up the rest. He did not go far. Behind them, at the last bit of town they'd passed through, two men tacked up in a hurry and argued about which wash cut toward the flats. Clay spit and pointed. "Doesn't matter, he won't walk far. Men like that never do." In the basin, the gray horse turned his head toward something he remembered and blew, a low note that said, "I know a way." Then he did the thing no one on two legs would have bet on. He gathered himself, left his shadow draped over the man a little longer, and broke into a trot, as if to bring back whatever was needed to keep the world from going small and still under that merciless sun. Back on the town's main road, a girl nobody watched much led a burro past a water barrel and looked up at the ridge where heat wavered. "Hush," she told the animal when it balked, eyes wide on the shimmering line. "Something's out there." By the time the wind lost interest and the sky came back down out of copper to its usual hard blue, word and water and trouble were all traveling toward Cedar Flats from different directions, and the paper on the post office door flapped once, twice, as if nodding a yes to a plan Eli Turner hadn't agreed to and a day he hadn't asked for. Near his boots, the hat brim shook with a small tremor of hoof on ground. The shadow that had covered him shifted, then returned like a promise kept on purpose. Eli didn't know any of that. He only knew the sound the world makes when you're allowed one more breath. The windmill back at Hollow Creek clicked one more time and then stopped, like it was listening too. Far out where the land folded into rust and bone, Eli Turner stirred beneath the bruised sky. The storm had spent itself sometime before dawn. It left behind silence thick enough to touch, and a light that came up slow and cautious, as though the sun was ashamed of what it had done. The air still smelled of iron and dust. Eli's lips were split. His skin was leather and salt. When he tried to move, his muscles answered with fire. Silver Dust stood beside him, sides streaked with sand, mane knotted into ropes. The old gelding lowered his head, pressing a soft nose against Eli's shoulder, the breath warm, steady, alive. "Still here, huh?" Eli whispered. The sound came out like paper tearing. "You fool thing!" The horse flicked an ear but didn't move away. Somewhere deep in his chest, Eli felt something shift, a small ember of gratitude that hadn't burned in years. He forced himself upright, every joint complaining. The basin around them was a wide bowl of light. Nothing moved except heat already starting to lift. He found his canteen and held it upside down, not even a single drop. He looked to the horizon. There was nothing but rippling air and the promise of distance. He wiped his mouth and looked west. "There's a well somewhere yonder," he told Silver Dust. "Cedar Flats way. If it's dry, we're done. If it ain't, we live another day." The horse seemed to understand, because he snorted and nudged Eli's arm forward. Together, they started walking. The day grew older and crueler. The ground changed from sand to clay, cracked into patterns that looked like maps to nowhere. Each step stirred ghosts of dust. Sweat dried before it could reach his collar. Eli's boots left dark prints that vanished almost as soon as they formed. By noon, the heat was a living thing, crawling into his ears, whispering nonsense. He stopped to rest under the shadow of a leaning post, the first sign of man he'd seen in miles. A strand of barbed wire ran from it into the distance, glinting like a line of teeth. The wire hummed faintly in the wind. "Fences," Eli muttered. "Always a damn fence between a man and what he needs." He followed it, tracing the line with his eyes, until it led him to a place where the earth dipped and a wooden tank sat surrounded by posts and metal signs. The words were sun-blind, but he could still make out the letters burned deep. "Property of Charles Denton. Trespassers will be shot." Eli stopped. So did Silver Dust. Inside the fence, he saw what he'd been looking for. Water, not much, but enough to shimmer. The smell hit him first, clean and metallic, like salvation. He leaned on the top wire, staring at that tank. "Just a mouthful," he said softly. "For him, not for me." The horse's ears twitched toward him, catching the tremor in his voice. Eli looked around. The land was open, quiet. No riders. No wagons. Just wind and sun, and that cruel glint of wet. He stepped closer, hands on the post. The barbed wire bit his palm when he tried to spread it. He gritted his teeth and pushed harder until a strand popped free with a twang. Silver Dust snorted and pawed the dirt, uncertain. "Go on," Eli urged. "Drink. Nobody's looking." The horse stepped through carefully, neck arched, tail flicking at flies. He lowered his muzzle into the trough and drank deep. The sound of it, the soft gulping and sigh, was almost holy. Eli stood there, dizzy with relief. Then a voice cut through the air, sharp and close. "Well, I'll be damned." Eli turned. 3 men on horseback had appeared from behind a low ridge. The one in front wore a white hat too clean for this country, and a revolver that looked well used. His face was narrow, smooth, and pink from a life spent avoiding real work. "Charles Denton," Eli said, recognizing the name on the sign before the man even opened his mouth. "Looks like you can read," Denton drawled, "which means you know that water ain't yours." Eli stepped back from the fence. "Didn't take but a drink for my horse. Been dry 2 days." Denton's eyes slid past him to the gelding, who raised his head, muzzle dripping silver. "That right? Shame you couldn't wait to ask." He gestured to the man beside him. "Cal, teach this drifter about property." Cal, a broad man with shoulders like a barn door, swung down from his saddle. His boots hit the ground heavy. "You heard the boss." Eli raised both hands slightly. "Ain't looking for trouble." "Trouble's what you found." Cal's punch came fast and low. It caught Eli under the ribs. Pain bloomed white. He stumbled back against the post, breath gone. Another hit came across his jaw, snapping his head sideways. "Leave him," Denton said lazily. "Let him feel it. Then maybe he'll crawl back to wherever beggars come from." Cal grabbed Eli's shirt and drove a knee into his stomach. Eli folded, but didn't fall. His vision blurred. The world tunneled down to the smell of sweat and iron. Then something cracked. Silver dust had come around the fence at a run. The old gelding hit Cal square in the shoulder with a blow that sounded like a hammer meeting bone. The big man went down hard, rolling through the dust. Denton's hand went for his gun, but the horse reared, hooves flashing in front of him. For a heartbeat, even Denton flinched. Eli forced himself upright, grabbing the reins with one hand. "That's enough!" he barked. Silver dust froze, chest heaving, eyes wide but locked on Denton. Dust hung in the air between them like smoke after gunfire. Denton's lip curled. "You'll regret that, Turner. You and that beast both." Eli wiped the blood from his mouth. "I already regret most things. You'll have to wait your turn." Denton swung up into his saddle. "You're done in these parts. Anyone gives you water, they'll answer to me. Get off my land before I make you fertilizer." The riders turned, spurs flashing, and disappeared into the haze. Eli stood there shaking. Silver dust nickered softly, stepping close, the muscle along his neck trembling. Eli touched his muzzle. "You saved me again, didn't you, old fool?" He looked back at the trough. The surface of the water was still rippling from the fight. He wanted to drink more than anything, but pride, stubborn and cracked, stopped him. He picked up his hat, dusted it off, and put it on. "We'll find our own spring," he said. "Somewhere Denton ain't poisoned." They started walking again, away from the fence, away from the sign with its threats carved deep. Behind them, the wind tugged at the loose wire until it sang a lonely high note. By the time the sun began to set, Eli could see the mountains in the distance, their edges gold and jagged. His ribs ached. His mouth was dry enough to hurt. But something else had come alive inside him again. A slow anger, old as the land itself. He stopped once to rest his hand on the horse's neck. "Reckon we made a new enemy today," he said. "But maybe that's better than dying quiet." Silver dust flicked an ear and kept walking. The night would bring cold. The desert always paid its debts that way. But for now, as darkness crawled over the basin, Eli Turner still moved, and the horse stayed beside him, every step a promise that neither of them was done yet. Somewhere behind them, Charles Denton watched from a ridge with his binoculars, face unreadable in the dusk. He spoke to the man beside him. "He'll die before he reaches water." The other man spat. "What if he don't?" Denton smiled thin. "Then we'll make sure he wishes he had." And out there, under a sky turning violet, Eli's silhouette marched west. Two figures, one man, one horse, crossing the kind of country that remembered everything. The day had died hard, dragging its heat into night. The horizon still glowed the color of spilled embers, and the first stars blinked awake, wary of what they saw below. The air cooled fast, the way desert air always does, trading fire for frost without apology. Eli pulled his coat tighter around his ribs and let the chill bite. After the day he'd had, it felt almost clean. Silver dust limped slightly on his left foreleg, the one that had taken the strain when he'd struck Cal. Eli noticed it in the rhythm of hoofbeats. Thud, thud, scrape, thud. He slowed their pace, listening, worrying. "You shouldn't have done that," he muttered. "I can take a beating." The horse snorted as if to argue. Maybe he was right. The land stretched ahead like a sea drained of water. There were ridges that looked like waves frozen in place, and the moonlight turned the sand pale enough to mistake for snow. A long way off, a faint ridge rose from the horizon. the foothills leading toward the San Piedra Range. Somewhere near there, Eli remembered, was a cluster of springs that sometimes held water after the rains. It was a thin hope, but hope all the same. They walked through the dark. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their voices sharp and thin. Silver Dust's ears twitched toward the sound, but he didn't spook. The two of them had been traveling together long enough to know when danger was just talk. When the first light of dawn peeled the stars away, Eli stopped on a rise and looked back. The desert behind them lay wide and empty. He could almost see the shimmer of the Denton Ranch in the distance, the fence, the trough, the men who'd looked at him like a trespasser in his own land. He spat into the dust. "You'll get yours, Charles Denton," he said quietly. "Men like you always do." By mid-morning, the sun had climbed again, meaner than before. The small wind from earlier had died completely, leaving the world still enough that Eli could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He took a sip from his canteen, the last one. It was barely a mouthful, but he tilted it toward Silver Dust. The horse licked the edge of the tin, then nudged it back. "Fine," Eli said. "We'll split it in heaven then." They moved on. The day blurred into a series of false horizons. Every shimmer promised water. Every shimmer lied. The cracked earth gleamed like broken glass, and sometimes Eli thought he saw the shadow of trees ahead, only for them to melt into more heat haze. The horse's steps grew heavier. Eli could see the foam drying white on his neck. He began to walk beside him instead of riding, holding the reins loosely. "You carried me far enough," he said. "Time I did the same." Hours passed. The world had no edges, only color. Yellow, white, and the hard blue of an unforgiving sky. Eli's breath rasped in his chest. He counted steps to stay awake. 100 forward, rest, then 100 more. When his knees buckled, Silver Dust leaned close, letting him brace against the horse's flank until he found balance again. By late afternoon, Eli's vision began to stutter. The mountains, once sharp, now looked soft as smoke. His hands trembled as he adjusted the rope across Silver Dust's back. The horse lifted his head suddenly, nostrils flaring. "What is it, boy?" Silver Dust pawed the ground and blew hard through his nose. Somewhere ahead, there was movement, a thin column of dust not made by wind. Eli squinted. Wagon wheels. A small train heading east, 4 or 5 at most. He could see the tops of canvas covers glinting in the sun. Relief hit him like a punch. "Come on," he croaked. "We're saved." He stumbled toward the trail, waving an arm. The first wagon slowed. The man driving it was thick-shouldered, his beard bleached by the sun. He eyed Eli with the wary look of someone who's seen too many strangers. "Afternoon," Eli called, his voice rough. "My canteen's gone dry. I just need some water for the horse. I can pay or trade, whatever's fair." The man's expression didn't change. "Ain't got water to spare," he said. Eli blinked. "Not asking for much. Half a quart, maybe." "We got women and kids in these wagons," the man replied. "We run short, they die. Can't risk it for some drifter." Eli took a step forward, desperate. "I ain't a drifter. I'm a hand from Hollow Creek. Name's Eli Turner. I can show you the safest route west. There's springs up near—" "We've got maps," the man interrupted. His hand twitched near the rifle by his knee. "Best you keep moving, old-timer. This trail don't owe you nothing." A woman's face appeared in the canvas opening behind him, eyes soft with pity. "Thomas, surely we can spare—" "Stay inside," he snapped. Eli stood there in the heat, swaying slightly. He could feel Silver Dust breathing beside him, shallow and quick. The wagons rolled on, the sound of hooves fading into the distance until there was only silence again. He stared at the empty road for a long time. His throat hurt too much to curse. Finally, he looked at the horse. "Guess it's still just you and me." They turned north, chasing the direction the wind used to come from. The sun dropped lower, but didn't cool. Eli's head pounded. He stopped counting steps. His mind wandered back to Hollow Creek, to the corral at dusk, to the sound of his wife laughing while brushing her hair on the porch. The image was so real he almost smiled. Silver Dust stumbled, and Eli caught his reins, steadying him. "Easy now," he murmured. "Ain't far." He didn't know if he meant it. The air thickened, shimmered. The mountains tilted like a mirage. Eli blinked hard and saw flashes of light, small fires dancing in the corners of his eyes. He fell to one knee, catching himself on a rock. The skin on his hands cracked open like dry mud. "Don't stop," he told himself. "Just don't stop." He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Silver Dust pressed close, shoulder to shoulder, the old horse's breath rasping loud and fast. Eli leaned into him, resting his head against the warm hide. "You done enough," he whispered. "Ain't your fault." He reached to unclip the reins from his hand, meaning to set the horse free. The leather slipped through his fingers, but before it could fall, Silver Dust jerked his head back, refusing. "Go," Eli whispered again. "Find water. Don't wait." The horse refused. He just stood there, eyes wide, steady as stone. Eli managed a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "Damn fool." The world narrowed to sound. The buzz of flies, the low groan of wind, the beating of his heart in his ears. He slumped forward, catching himself on one arm, then dropped. The ground burned his cheek. He thought he heard thunder, but there were no clouds. His last clear thought was of the horse, standing over him, the sky behind him endless and white. Then everything faded into that same color, until even pain couldn't reach him. Above them, vultures began to circle again, patient and silent. Silver Dust pawed the earth once, twice, as if trying to wake him, then turned his head toward the west, toward the faintest scent of water hidden beneath miles of stone and heat. He lowered his muzzle, breathing over Eli's still hand, and waited. Night would come soon, and with it a choice. Stay or search. The desert fell quiet, a kind of silence that seemed to listen. The air turned from gold to bruised violet, and the last heat bled away into the sand. Silver Dust stood motionless, every muscle locked, the whites of his eyes glinting faintly under the dimming sky. Flies had gathered at the corners of Eli's mouth, and the horse flicked them off with his tail, impatient, uneasy. The man didn't move. The smell of him, salt, dust, sweat, was fading, replaced by something colder. Silver Dust pawed once at the ground beside him, then bent low and pressed his muzzle to Eli's chest. There was a faint sound there, buried deep, like the echo of a distant drum. Still alive. Barely. The horse raised his head, looking toward the west where the sun had gone, toward the faint glimmer of starlight rising from the line of the horizon. Instinct tugged at him. Move, find water, survive. But another pull, deeper, older, held him here. The bond between them had been forged in dust and labor, in long days of fence wire and quiet trust. That bond was stronger than fear. He stayed through the night. When dawn came, it came without color, just a pale wash of light spilling over the flats. Eli's skin was cold to the touch. His lips were cracked white, his pulse slow and strange. A weak groan slipped from him, nothing more than a ghost of sound. Silver Dust lifted his head, ears twitching. Somewhere far off, a coyote barked, and then silence again. The horse took a step back, eyes searching the distance. The air smelled faintly of sage and stone, but under it, something else. Moisture, a memory of rain. Silver Dust snorted, testing it, and then again. He turned his head toward the faintest rise of ground, where the wind came cooler. He looked back once at Eli, still lying there with one arm crooked beneath his chest. Then, as if making a promise only he could keep, the horse started walking. He moved with slow, deliberate steps, nostrils wide, ears flicking. The scent grew stronger, a mineral tang that clung to the wind. Half a mile ahead, where the ground rose and split, a cluster of dark rocks shimmered in the morning light. Between them, a glint, the wet shine of a seep. It wasn't much, but it was life. Silver Dust stepped closer, nosing at the cracks where water oozed slow and steady into a shallow depression. He drank just enough to wet his tongue, then lifted his head and stared back across the flats. Eli was a small, still shape in the distance. The horse pawed at the ground, nervous. He could go back alone and live, or he could carry water back to the man who had freed him years ago from a pen not so different from this dry prison. He chose the harder road. Silver Dust dipped his muzzle again, soaking the coarse hair around his mouth, letting it drip down his neck. Then he turned and began the long walk back by the Stone. Time he reached Eli, the sun was rising cruel and white. The horse's sides heaved. He lowered his head and let a few drops fall from his muzzle onto the man's cracked lips. Nothing. He tried again, pressing his nose against Eli's cheek. A faint stir, a swallow, a cough that tore the silence. Eli's hand twitched. The horse nickered low, a sound halfway between comfort and command. Eli blinked against the glare. At first he thought he was still dreaming. The shape above him shimmered in the light, haloed by heat. Then he felt the wet against his lips. Water. He swallowed what little there was. Silver. Dust? The name rasped out like sandpaper. The horse bobbed his head, stamping the ground as if to say, "Get up." Eli tried. His arms shook, his ribs ached, but he rolled to his side. The world tilted around him. His vision swam with spots of light, but he managed to brace on one elbow. Silver Dust moved in closer, shoulder firm against Eli's arm, giving him something solid to lean on. "Where?" Eli started, then stopped. His voice was barely sound. "Water?" The horse turned his head west, then back to him. He took a step that way, stopped, looked over his shoulder. The meaning was clear. Eli managed to get to his knees, then his feet. He swayed, leaning heavy on the reins. His mouth tasted of metal and grit. His heart felt too big for his chest. "All right," he whispered. "Show me." They walked, slowly at first, then steadier as the wind shifted cooler. Eli's boots dragged furrows through the dust, his hand buried in Silver Dust's mane for balance. The horse moved at a careful pace, matching each step, steady as faith. After what felt like an eternity, the ground rose, and the rocks came into view. Eli saw the small pool glittering between them and nearly cried. He fell to his knees beside it, scooped the water in trembling hands, and drank. It was warm, metallic, and perfect. Silver Dust drank next, lowering his head beside Eli's shoulder. They stayed that way until the sun was high. When Eli could think again, he sat back and looked at the horse. "You went and found this, didn't you?" His voice broke. "You found it for me." The horse flicked his ears, eyes half-lidded, but calm. Eli reached out, tracing the scar along Silver Dust's shoulder, a reminder of the wire that once bit deep. "Guess we're even now," he murmured. "You saved me once. I saved you once. Maybe that's how it works." But the truth sat heavy in his chest. He hadn't saved the horse at all. Silver Dust had saved him again, the same way he had back at Hollow Creek when Eli's life had gone sideways. They rested until the shadows began to grow. When Eli stood, he felt stronger. The ache was still there, but so was something else, a quiet resolve. He looked at the horizon, toward the mountains that promised more trouble than rest. "You and me," he said softly. "No one else coming." The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of hooves far off. Silver Dust lifted his head, ears pricked. Eli turned too, scanning the distance. There, 3 riders, small against the glare, moving fast. He felt his gut tighten. Denton's men. Eli gathered the reins. "We're leaving." They started north, keeping low, following the dry creek bed that snaked toward the mesas. Dust rose behind them in thin trails, curling like smoke. The riders were still distant, but their course was clear. Eli whispered, "Not today." Silver Dust broke into a trot, then a gallop. The sun flashed off his coat like liquid fire. Eli bent low over the saddle, teeth clenched against the wind. The old horse's stride ride was uneven but determined. Rocks blurred past. The air burned his throat. They didn't stop until the shadows of the mesas swallowed them. There, in the shelter of stone, Eli dismounted, chest heaving. He listened. Only wind. The riders had lost their trail for now. He leaned against the horse's shoulder, laughing weakly through the exhaustion. "You keep pulling me out of graves, old friend." The horse flicked his ear, as if unimpressed by the compliment. Above them, the sun slid behind the ridge, painting the desert in copper light. Eli watched the sky darken and thought of Denton's threat, of the fence, the trough, the cruelty that had nearly killed him. His anger burned low and steady. He reached out, resting his palm on Silver Dust's neck. "They'll come again," he said quietly. "But next time, we'll be ready." The wind moved softly between the rocks, carrying a whisper that sounded almost like a promise. And as night crept down the mesa walls, Eli Turner sat beside his horse, the man and the animal outlined in firelight and shadow, 2 survivors bound by the same stubborn will to keep breathing, no matter what the desert demanded. Tomorrow, he thought, the reckoning would start. The fire burned low, spitting sparks into the cool dark. Eli sat with his back to the stone, a blanket over his shoulders and the weight of silence pressing down. Silver Dust dozed a few feet away, head low, one ear still turned toward him. The desert was never truly quiet. It sighed, shifted, breathed, but tonight it felt like the world itself was waiting for something to break. Eli couldn't stop thinking about the riders he'd seen. 3 silhouettes cutting through the horizon dust. Men like that didn't just vanish. Denton had money, and men who'd sell their own mothers for a few coins. They'd come back. He was sure of it. He rubbed the sore spot under his ribs where Cal's punch had landed and winced. Each throb reminded him of the simple truth. Out here, mercy got you hurt. But Silver Dust's soft breathing reminded him of another truth. Mercy was the only thing that still made him human. When dawn came, it came cold. The fire had died to embers, and the sky turned from black to the color of an old bruise. Eli packed what little he had left. 1 canteen, his knife, a coil of rope, and the memory of water still clinging to his throat. He brushed the ash from his coat and tightened the cinch on Silver Dust's saddle. The horse flinched slightly at the touch, tired from the run. "We'll keep to the ridge," Eli said quietly. "Let the sun chase someone else for a change." They started early, moving slow, staying close to shadow. The mesas rose around them like the bones of the world, cliffs painted in layers of red and gray, the work of centuries ground down to silence. In those canyons, a man could disappear if he knew how to listen. By mid-morning, the trail narrowed to a ledge no wider than a wagon board. The drop below fell straight into nothing. Silver Dust picked his way careful as a cat, nostrils flaring, hooves clinking on stone. A single slip would have sent them both to their end. Eli felt sweat roll down his back despite the chill. He didn't look down. Not once. When they finally reached level ground again, Eli exhaled hard. He pulled off his hat and wiped his forehead. "We made it," he murmured. The horse just flicked an ear, unimpressed. But the moment of peace didn't last. A sound carried on the wind, a metallic jingle, faint but sure. Spurs, then another, and another. Eli froze. He crouched low, eyes narrowing toward the canyon mouth behind them. 3 riders again, smaller in the distance but closing fast. He cursed under his breath. "Come on, boy," he said, swinging into the saddle. Silverdust lunged forward, hooves throwing sparks off the rock. They took the western fork, where the canyon widened into open desert. There was no cover, no mercy, only speed. The chase began. The wind tore at Eli's hat brim, his coat flapping like a flag behind him. Bullets cracked through the air, sharp, whining sounds that kicked up plumes of sand near Silverdust's hooves. One grazed Eli's sleeve, tearing the fabric. He didn't look back. He could hear the riders shouting, the thud of their horses closer now. Silverdust stumbled once but recovered, his stride leveling out again. Eli leaned low, whispering, "You've still got it in you, old boy. Just a little more." The land blurred. Mesas, dry scrub, the endless sweep of earth and sky. Every muscle in Eli's body screamed, every breath burned. But the gray horse ran like something born of the wind, carrying his rider through the dust storm that the chase had raised behind them. Then came the sound no man who rides ever wants to hear. A sharp crack, followed by the lurch of an animal in pain. Silverdust stumbled again, hard this time. A bullet had found his flank. The horse let out a cry that froze Eli's blood. He pulled the reins, bringing them both down in a sliding stop behind a rise of stone. Eli jumped off before the horse could fall. He ran his hands over Silverdust's side. Blood, dark and sticky, just behind the shoulder. Not deep, but bad enough. "Damn them," he whispered. "Damn them to hell." He tore a strip from his coat, pressed it hard against the wound. The horse trembled but stood, trusting. The riders were still coming. Eli could hear them now, laughing, one of them shouting, "Got him!" He lifted his head, eyes narrowing. His rifle was long gone, lost at Hollow Creek, but his knife still hung at his belt. He wasn't ready to die in the dirt. He reached for the reins, whispering, "We're not done yet." Silverdust's eyes rolled, white flashing, but he stood firm. Eli guided him behind a cluster of boulders, pulling him low. The first rider appeared over the ridge, scanning the flats below. Eli could see his face now. Cal, the big man with the broken nose, bandaged from their last meeting. Cal dismounted, rifle in hand, his grin wide. "Come on out, Turner. Denton says he'll pay double if you're still breathing." Eli said nothing. He waited, counting heartbeats. Cal stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel. When the man rounded the boulder, Eli moved. He grabbed Cal's wrist and drove his shoulder into the man's gut. The rifle went off wild, the shot echoing off the canyon walls. Cal swung a fist, but Eli ducked, slammed his forearm into Cal's neck, and shoved him backward into the rock. The other riders shouted, spurred forward. Eli snatched Cal's dropped rifle and fired once. One shot, one man down. The second rider turned his horse and bolted, dust trailing like a wound in the horizon. Eli didn't chase. He stood over Cal, chest heaving. "Tell Denton I ain't his game," he said, voice raw. Cal coughed, half laughing, half choking. "He'll come himself next time." "Then he'd better come ready," Eli said. He turned back to Silverdust. The horse was standing but shaking, the wound still bleeding. Eli's hands trembled as he wrapped another strip of cloth around it. "You're gonna be fine," he murmured. though the words sounded more like prayer than promise. When it was done, he leaned his forehead against the horse's neck, breathing in the warm smell of sweat and blood. "You saved me again," he whispered. "Always you." Silver Dust shifted his weight, pressing his head gently against Eli's shoulder, as if to say, "We're even now." By the time the sun touched the edge of the world, the desert was quiet again. The dead man lay where he'd fallen, and the rest had fled. Eli and Silver Dust moved west, slow but steady. That night, as they camped beneath a sky sharp with stars, Eli stared at the bandage darkening with blood. He knew they couldn't keep running forever. The wound needed care, real care, and soon. There was a town somewhere north, a place called Redemption Springs. He watched the firelight dance in the horse's eyes and said softly, "Tomorrow, we head there. It's time this story turns." Silver Dust flicked an ear, the fire's glow tracing the curve of his neck. Eli lay back against his saddle, listening to the rhythm of the horse's breathing. The desert wind whispered across the flats, cool and full of dust, carrying away the last echoes of gunfire and the scent of blood. The reckoning had begun, and for the first time in years, Eli Turner had a reason to keep moving toward the light. By dawn, the desert had traded its chill for the first edge of heat. A pale wind came crawling down from the mountains, brushing over the sage and whispering through the canyons. Eli's eyes opened to the sound of Silver Dust shifting beside him. The horse stood, favoring his wounded leg, but steady, patient as a sunrise. Eli pushed himself upright, wincing. Sleep had given him no rest. His ribs ached, his throat burned, and his mind still carried the echo of gunfire. But there was purpose now, a thin thread of it, pulling him toward Redemption Springs. It was a day's ride if they made good time. He saddled the horse slow, careful not to tug near the bandaged flank. The fabric was stiff with dried blood. When he tied it off again, he whispered, "We'll find a doctor there. I promise." Silver Dust turned his head and breathed against Eli's shoulder, a small puff of air that felt almost like forgiveness. They started north. The land softened gradually, from stone to sand to the pale grass of open plain. Mesquite trees twisted up from the earth like old men raising their hands to the sun. By mid-morning, a thin road appeared, a scar of wagon tracks cutting through the dust. Eli followed it, scanning the horizon for any sign of smoke or rooftops. He was half a mile from town when the first bell rang. It was small and metallic, carried on the wind, the sound of the blacksmith's hammer striking an anvil. For the first time in days, the sound of civilization didn't feel like a threat. It felt like grace. Redemption Springs wasn't much of a town, but it stood proud. A handful of weather-beaten buildings lined the main street, a church steeple leaning slightly, a saloon with a swinging sign that read, "The Palomino Star." A few wagons sat parked out front, oxen chewing idly at troughs filled with dust and straw. Eli rode in slow, tipping his hat to the first man he passed, a shopkeeper sweeping his porch. The man nodded politely, eyes flicking to the blood-stained bandage on Silver Dust's flank. "Long trail?" he asked. "Long enough," Eli said. "Looking for a doc?" The man pointed down the street. "Doc's office next to the sheriff's. Ask for Brennan. He don't talk much, but he's good with a needle." Eli thanked him and led Silver Dust forward. The office was marked by a single sign, Dr. James Brennan, Medicine and Mercy. The front steps creaked under Eli's boots as he dismounted. A tall man in a white shirt appeared in the doorway, sleeves rolled, hair gray at the temples. He looked like a man who had seen every kind of wound and stopped counting years ago. "Bring him inside," Brennan said without asking a question. The small barn behind the office smelled of alcohol and hay. Eli held Silver Dust's reins while the doctor cleaned the wound. The horse flinched but didn't rear. Bullet passed clean through, Brennan said. He's lucky it didn't hit bone. He'll limp for a while, but he'll live. Eli exhaled, a sound halfway between a sigh and a prayer. That makes two of us. Brennan's eyes lifted. Yours wasn't a clean trip either. Ran into trouble south of here, Eli said carefully. A man named Charles Denton. The doctor's hands paused. Denton. He's been buying up land all across the county. Water rights, mostly. Yeah, Eli said. That's his game. And he doesn't play fair. Before Brennan could answer, a voice came from the doorway. That's true enough. Eli turned. A tall man stood framed in the sunlight. Broad shoulders, dark hat, badge pinned over his vest. The star gleamed like a warning. Sheriff Wade Holloway, the man said. Heard there was a stranger in town asking about Denton. You Turner? Eli nodded, wary. Used to ride for Hollow Creek. Denton's got a long reach, Sheriff. You already in it? Wade's expression didn't change. I enforce the law, Mr. Turner. Denton's got papers and deeds to everything he touches. Can't arrest a man for being rich. Eli stepped closer, his voice low. You can when he tries to kill a man for drinking from a trough. Brennan looked between them. Sheriff, I treated that horse myself. Bullet wound. You think Turner's lying? The sheriff sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. No, I don't. But proof's harder to keep than a conscience. Denton's men testify otherwise, and you'll be the one behind bars. Eli's jaw tightened. So the law's blind and redemption springs too? Not blind, the sheriff said quietly. Just outnumbered. For a long moment the room was silent except for Silver Dust's slow breathing. Then Wade spoke again. There's been talk. Denton's pumping wells near the North Ridge. Water that don't belong to him. Folks say it's poisoned, killing the cattle. But no one'll stand up to him. Maybe it's time someone did, Eli said. The sheriff studied him for a moment. You sound like a man with a death wish. I sound like a man who's run out of reasons to keep quiet. Wade nodded once. There's a meeting tonight at the church. Ranchers talking about forming a committee. Maybe sending a letter to the governor. You come tell your story. Might give him some backbone. I'll be there, Eli said. As the sheriff left, Brennan finished tying the bandage and wiped his hands. You're going to stir up a hornet's nest, he warned. Already been stung, Eli replied. Can't get worse. That night, the church was packed tighter than it had been in years. Lanterns swung from hooks, throwing long shadows across rough-hewn pews. Farmers, ranchers, and wives filled the benches, their faces carved from hard living. Sheriff Wade stood near the front, hands clasped. When Eli stepped inside, the Kosamon room went quiet. He walked to the pulpit, feeling 100 eyes follow him. Silver Dust waited outside, tied to the post, his silhouette framed by the window's glow. Eli cleared his throat. Name's Eli Turner. Some of you might remember me from Hollow Creek. A murmur ran through the crowd. He went on, voice steady. I didn't come here looking for trouble, but trouble found me anyway. Denton's fencing off the wells. He's claiming what don't belong to him. And when a man or beast drinks from his water, he sends bullets instead of warnings. The room shifted, men looking at each other, women whispering. I seen good land dying, Eli continued. Seen water run red from the poison he's been using in them pumps. You think he's gonna stop when he's had his fill? He won't. He'll take this town dry. For a moment, no one spoke. Then an older rancher in the back stood. He's right. My cattle been sick for weeks. Vet says mercury. Said it's coming from upstream. Others began to murmur in agreement. The air grew thick with anger. Sheriff Wade stepped forward, voice calm but firm. Now hold on. We'll get proof first. If Denton's breaking the law, he'll answer to it. Eli looked at him. And if the law won't hold him? Then we will, said a voice from the crowd. The church erupted, voices rising, fists pounding on wood, years of fear boiling over into rage. Eli stood still, the noise washing over him. For the first time in a long time, he saw something spark in their eyes. Hope, fragile but burning. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the sound of their anger into the night. Silver Dust lifted his head, nostrils flaring. Somewhere in the dark beyond the ridge, a lantern flickered, then another. Denton's men were already listening. Sheriff Wade cleared the church with a firm word and a raised hand, ushering folks out the side door in 2s and 3s so they wouldn't look like a mob. Home now, he said low. No use giving Denton a reason to call us rioters. Lanterns winked out along Main Street, one by one, until the town looked like a sleeping animal, all breath and no teeth. Eli stepped into the cool night and untied Silver Dust from the hitching rail. The old gelding nosed his pocket, searching for the grain that wasn't there. Eli scratched the white-flecked jaw instead. Tomorrow we show 'em, he murmured. Not talk, truth. He glanced at Wade. You said there were rumors of pumps north? Wade's hat brim dipped. Walk with me. They moved through the hushed street, boots whispering on hardpack. Wade said nothing more until they'd cut behind the livery and taken the dry wash that curved east, the church bell now a memory. Finally, he spoke. 2 months back, a boy came into town with blisters on his hands like he'd been shifting pipe. Said he'd been hired to work nights laying a line up near the North Ridge. Paid cash. Told me to keep my nose out of it if I liked it where it sat. Denton, Eli said. Couldn't prove it, Wade answered. Still can't, but I know a lie when it walks past. They stopped where the wash met the open flats. A fragile hush lay over everything. Coyotes far off, wind tapping at yucca spines. The stars were bright enough to hurt. Wade pointed to a black scar of land, barely a shade darker than the plain. There. If he's stealing the groundwater, he's hiding it there. Eli looked from the sheriff to the silhouette of Silver Dust. The horse stood square despite the limp, ears forward, like a compass needle stroking true north. Eli stroked his neck. You remember, don't you? The gray tossed his head, as if no other answer was needed. They set out before dawn, a 3-point shadow crossing scrub. As the day came on, the ridge sharpened into cliffs. At its base lay a jumble of boulders the color of rusted blood. When they topped a low rise, Wade put up a hand. There, he said. Half buried under sheets of canvas and brush, a nest of iron gleamed where no iron ought to be. A pump sat in a pit, its flywheel still wet, a long line of pipe running like a snake toward the hills. Beside it, a box of canisters wore faded labels. Mercury, do not ingest. Eli's throat went tight. Poison, Wade said. He's using it to push the water up. Faster, cheaper. Kills everything down the line. Eli swallowed hard. That's why the cattle went bad. Why the grass along the creek died like it had been salted. Silver Dust stepped to the pit's edge and sniffed. He snorted once, offended, then backed. Wade pulled a notebook from his vest, hands quick and neat, sketching the lay of pipe, the labels, every angle that might matter when paper had to fight paper. He slid 3 canisters into a sack. Need proof? Here it is. Eli's eyes moved to a scattering of boot prints around the pump. Big feet, narrow heels, a shoe with a star-shaped hobnail at the center. He crouched, touched the edge of one print. The leather of his fingertips remembered another day, another boot, a belt buckle that flashed and a voice that said trespassers would be shot. Denton's foreman, he said. Cal. Wade nodded. Which means Denton ain't far. They covered the pit with brush again, then struck for the higher ground. The trail turned bad, rock shards sliding underfoot like broken dishes. Eli let Silverdust choose his steps. The horse moved with the caution of pain, careful and sure, carrying them into the ribs of the ridge. From above, the land spilled out in waves, dun-colored, heat-shivered, endless. Around mid-morning, they found what they hadn't known they were looking for. A thin, lively braid of water slipping from a seam in the rock and dropping into a stone cup no bigger than a saddlebag. The spring sang a sound as light as bells. Green clung to the edges, moss, a handful of stubborn grass, the soft, bright hope of something living where it shouldn't. Eli stared, then laughed once, short and cracked. There you are. Wade crouched, cupped his hand, and tasted. Clean. He looked up at the cliffs. If Denton found this seam, he followed it under, set his pumps below, and stole it right out from under the county. Silverdust shoved in and drank like prayer. Eli let him, then took his turn, cupping water and letting it sit on his tongue until he could remember the word sweet again. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and stood. We take you to town, he said to the spring, like it was a mule he could halter. We show you to a judge, we tie Denton to it so hard he can't wriggle free. Careful, Wade said, eyes narrowing. We're not alone. The horse heard it first, a faint tick far down canyon, the pebble sound of hooves on shale. Shadows moved where no wind moved them. Eli took 3 steps from the spring and pressed his palm to Silverdust's shoulder. The gelding went still, ears pinned straight at the sound. Men appeared as if the ridge had birthed them. 4, then 5, each wearing a gun the way a man wears old sins, comfortable and quiet. Cal Murrow led, jaw strapped tight, a new band of linen cutting his cheek. Behind him, the white hat rode higher, Charles Denton, clean as a church floor, a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Well now, Denton drawled, reining in by the spring like he owned the invention of water. Sheriff Holloway, Mr. Turner, out for a picnic? Wade's face went flat as a board. Found. You're pumped, Denton. And you're poison. Got your name without you saying it. Denton's smile thinned. Sheriff, if you're accusing me of a crime, you'd best do it in a place where walls remember. Right now, all you've got is a puddle and a story told by a man who talks to animals. Eli stepped forward. The land tells its own story. He pointed to the pipe scar where the brush hadn't quite grown back, to the boot prints that crossed and recrossed, to the bend in the grass leaning toward the pit. And your boots can't help but autograph every page. Cal shifted in his saddle, eyes on Eli like a dog eyeing meat. I owe you for the other day, Turner. You owe me the truth, Eli said, voice steady. Start with why your boss poisons wells. Denton's expression didn't change. I improve what nature failed to finish. Water belongs to men who can afford to bring it to market. That's progress. He looked past Eli to the spring, the thin silver seam cutting the rock. And progress doesn't ask permission. Wade's hand hovered low, but not low enough to be foolish. You stole from the aquifer, Denton. You pumped it with mercury. I've got your canisters in my bag and my name across the bottom of the page. You come quiet or you come loud. Either path leads to a cell. Denton laughed softly. Sheriff, you don't have the men to keep me, and we both know it. You cuff me, I'm out before the ink dries, but you go ahead and point that noble nose of yours toward justice. In the meantime, he flicked 2 fingers. Cal and 2 of the riders lifted rifles in one smooth motion. Eli moved without thinking, putting his body between the barrels and the horse. The air went hard as wire. Easy, Wade said. Nobody's gonna be a hero today. On the contrary, Denton said. I already am. He nudged his horse forward until its shadow crossed the spring. His white hat made a pale coin against the cliff. You can posture on Sunday, Sheriff, and preach your sermons. Out here, law is the man who owns the pipe. He looked to Cal. Plug the spring. It happened quick. One man swung down with a shovel, jamming stones into the seam. Water hiccuped, then thinned. Silver dust blew, stamping, as if insulted by the act. Eli took a step and Cal turned his rifle a degree. Wade's jaw bunched. That's enough. Not quite, Denton said. His eyes went to Eli. I hear you've been telling stories in town, Turner. Fine. Tell this one. You found a trickle in a rock and watched it die. Then you watched your horse die next. Before the word could finish leaving his mouth, the gray gelding lunged. Pain or pride lit him. Eli would never know. Silver dust came off his forehand, front hooves striking sparks against the shovel blade. The man fell back with a shout, dropping the tool. The shovel slid into the stone cup and wedged hard, redirecting the thin stream just enough to spill free of the plug. The water, obstinate as any living thing, found a new tongue down the rock. It sang again. Cal swung his rifle. The crack ripped the air. Silver dust screamed, that terrible tearing sound no man forgets, and staggered to his knees. Eli caught the bridle and hauled, his shoulder lighting with its own kind of fire. The horse fought the ground and found it, surging up to stand between Eli and the guns. Blood bloomed dark along his flank, but he planted himself like the cottonwood Eli had once buried a ring beneath. Hold! Wade roared, pistol out now, eyes murder steady. You shoot again! I put you in the ground, Denton! Badge be damned! Silence slammed down. Heat crowded in. Dust settled in slow curtains. Denton stared at Wade a long time, the stillness of him uglier than any shout. Then he smiled, thin, cold, a letter opener made into a mouth. Sheriff, he said, I do believe your temper's showing. We'll finish this where your kind feel brave. He tipped his hat. In front of a bench that owes me rent. He wheeled his horse. Cal backed away, face pale under dust, and the others turned with him. They rode off at a trot that wasn't hurried, letting the sound of their departure hammer the ridge, leaving behind the stink of gun oil and a spring that refused to die. Wade stood breathing like a man who had carried a piano up a ladder. He holstered his pistol slow. You all right? He asked, eyes already on the bandage. The new wound wept red. Eli pressed both hands against it, felt the horse's ribs move under skin and muscle. He's all right, Eli lied. He's all right. The sheriff knelt at the spring and pulled the trapped shovel free. Water spilled steady now, filling the stone cup and shouldering past it, running in a narrow ribbon down the rock toward the flats. He cupped his palm again, tasted, and nodded. Clean still. It'll live. Will we? Eli asked, quieter than the water. Wade looked over the wide, shimmering basin to where the world bent into heat. Depends how loud proof can talk. They rigged a sling from Wade's bedroll and strapped it tight around Silver Dust's ribs to slow the bleeding. The horse tolerated the insult because the man he'd chosen asked him to. When Eli stepped back, his hands shone with the red work of love. Redemption springs, Wade said. We take the pump canisters, the shovel with mercury on it, my notes, and your testimony. We make paper our way. They started down out of the ridge as the sun climbed into its meaner hours, leading the gray so he didn't spend what strength he had left. The water's thin music followed them a little way, then lost heart in the dry. Half a mile from town, a dust devil stitched the road in front of them. It opened like a hand, then closed again, leaving the air tasting of old coins. Wade shaded his eyes. You see that? Eli lifted his head. On the ridge above the road, 6 riders sat, cut, from the sky. Denton's men in a black line. The white hat wasn't among them. Messengers, Wade said. He's gone ahead. Eli felt the world draw tight, as if a cinch had been hauled hard. He put his hand to Silver Dust's neck and felt the tremble there. We can make it, he said. And whether he meant the road, the town, or the rest of their lives, he didn't say. They pushed on. As they reached the first fence line outside Redemption Springs, a bell began to toll from the church. Once, twice, 3 times, then kept going. Not a call to service, a warning. Folks stepped onto porches, hands shading eyes, the town waking into a question it didn't want to ask. In front of the sheriff's office, a carriage sat. A fine thing with polished wheels and a driver too clean for dust. Beside it stood Charles Denton, hat in his hand, smile sharpened to court. 2 men flanked him with papers in their fists and pens like bayonets. Wade muttered, "He brought the judge." Eli looked down at Silver Dust's bandage. Old blood, new blood. And then at the Springs stain on Wade's sleeve, at the sack of canisters heavy against the sheriff's hip. He took a breath that tasted like iron and sage. "Then let's make him hear the water," he said, and led the bleeding horse into town. Behind them, the ridge kept its secrets a little longer. Ahead, the law of men gathered with ink and threats. Between them, a spring still ran under stone, and a horse still stood when he should have fallen. Somewhere, up in the hard blue, a vulture folded one wing and watched them all. The sun was just past noon when Eli and Sheriff Wade reached the edge of Redemption Springs. The town that had once felt small now looked like a stage set for a reckoning. Folks stood on porches, whispering, watching the bleeding horse and the 2 men walking beside him. The church bell still echoed faintly, rolling across the roofs like distant thunder. Eli felt the heat in every bone. The dust clung to his boots, his throat, his heartbeat. But it wasn't the weather that burned. It was Denton, waiting at the center of town, dressed in clean linen and polished anger. "Well, look what the desert coughed up," Denton called, voice smooth as molasses and twice as thick. "A lawman and a thief. Quite the pair." Wade didn't stop walking. He kept his stride steady, his hand close to the Colt on his hip. "We're here to file a complaint," he said flatly. "You'll want to step aside." Denton's smile didn't move. "Complaint? Sheriff, the only complaint in this county's got my name signed at the bottom." He nodded toward the 2 men beside him, one carrying a leather folio, the other an inkwell and pen. "Judge Harland and his clerk. You know how rare it is to get a judge to ride this far out? You should be grateful." Eli felt something cold coil behind his ribs. "You brought your own justice." Denton turned his head slightly, still smiling. "Justice is a matter of convenience, Mr. Turner. The closer it rides with a man, the quicker it answers." The judge cleared his throat. "Sheriff, Mr. Turner, you stand accused of trespassing, vandalism, and the unlawful destruction of private property. I've been informed you interfered with water operations legally owned and registered to the Denton Land Company." Wade's jaw clenched. "You're not going to lecture me about law when I've got proof of poisoning. These—" He pulled the canvas sack from his saddle and let the metal canisters clang to the ground. The silver labels caught the sun. "Mercury. Do not ingest." Gasps rose from the small crowd forming behind them. Wade held up his notebook, its pages covered in careful sketches and coordinates. "These were found beside Denton's pumps. I tasted the spring water myself before and after. There's contamination in it. You don't have to be a scientist to see what's happening." Judge Harlan didn't look at the papers. "Evidence gathered without warrant or supervision is inadmissible. Besides, you can't prove Mr. Denton placed those materials there." Eli took a step forward, voice rough. He didn't just place them, he ordered them. His foreman, Cal Murrow, was there. Shot my horse for it. The judge's gaze flicked to Silverdust, who stood trembling but upright, his breath fogging faintly in the heat. A tragic accident, no doubt, he said. Still, an animal doesn't testify. The crowd stirred uneasily. A woman near the saloon muttered, "That horse saved him." Someone else whispered, "Heard it myself." Denton lifted a hand, silencing the murmurs with a gesture more practiced than prayer. These are dangerous lies, and the longer they spread, the harder it'll be for this town to recover its reputation. Reputation? Eli barked, the word like gravel in his mouth. You're poisoning the land, the water, and every creature that drinks from it. You think that's something you can polish with a fancy title? The judge snapped. Mr. Turner, you'll hold your tongue or I'll have you removed for contempt. Wade stepped forward, eyes fixed on Harland. Removed? You ride into my town, read from Denton's script, and call it justice? You don't scare me, Judge, and you sure as hell don't scare the truth. The air between them grew tight enough to hum. Eli could feel Silverdust's weight against his shoulder, the animal's breathing uneven, hot against his sleeve. Then a sound broke through the tension, a clear, ringing whistle, high and thin, almost musical. Eli froze. It wasn't a sound made by any man or wind. It was the small wooden whistle he'd carved back at Hollow Creek, the one he'd trained Silverdust to follow. The horse raised his head at once, ears flicking forward. Easy, boy, Eli murmured, realizing the bruise had caught the whistle still tied to his belt. But the moment stirred something in the onlookers. The horse, bleeding and weary, took one step forward, then another, until he stood square between Eli and Denton, head high. The crowd hushed. You see that? Eli said, voice steady. He's half dead and still stands where he knows right belongs. He pointed to Denton. You tell me which creature's got the soul of a man. It landed like a hammer. The judge looked away first. Denton's face tightened, the smile cracking at its edges. You're done here, Denton hissed. You and your beast. Before anyone could move, a rider came tearing down Main Street from the East Road, dust flying. The man pulled hard, dismounted, and stumbled toward them, shouting, Sheriff! Sheriff Wade! Wade caught him by the arm. What is it? The rider's face was streaked with sweat and panic. The North Ridge, one of Denton's pipes burst, water everywhere, dead cattle floating in it. Whole valley smells like metal. Folks are getting sick. The words fell like thunderclaps. Wade turned, slow and deliberate, toward the judge. You hear that? Harlan swallowed, his throat working. We'll investigate. You'll ride, Wade said. Now. Within minutes, half the town was moving. Wagons, horses, shouting voices cutting through the heat. Denton stood still, eyes narrow, his control slipping like dust through fingers. Eli swung up on Silverdust, ignoring the pain in his side. The horse stumbled once, then caught himself. Wade mounted beside him. You shouldn't be riding, the sheriff said. Neither should he, Eli answered, but he's still moving. They rode north again, following the smell before they saw the sight. It hit like rot and metal, the air thick, unnatural. When they crested the ridge, the whole valley shimmered with a silver sheen, water pooling across the flats. Dead cattle lay bloated near the banks, birds circling low. The pump house at the center was split open like a rib cage, black water gushing from its heart. Mercury, Wade said quietly. God help us. The judge sat stiff on his horse, staring at the ruin. If that's true, then... Eli turned in his saddle, meeting Denton's eyes. No more words. You did this. For the first time, Denton's mask cracked. It wasn't supposed to leak, he muttered. They overpumped. Cal's dead, Eli said, "and this land will bury your name next." The sheriff dismounted, pulling a coil of rope from his saddle. "Charles Denton," he said, voice carrying like a bell across the poisoned valley. "You're under arrest for criminal negligence, unlawful poisoning of water sources, and the deaths of A gunshot split the air. Denton's driver, forgotten in the chaos, had drawn and fired. The bullet whined past Wade's hat, kicking dust beside Eli's boot. In a heartbeat, Wade fired back. The man dropped. The echo rolled across the water and vanished into the cliffs. Eli swung down, breath ragged, checking the horse. Silver Dust's bandage was soaked again, red blooming through gray hair. Still, the gelding stood steady, head turned toward the dying pump, watching it sputter and fail. "Look at him," Wade said softly. "He's seen more truth than any court ever will." Eli reached out, resting a hand on the horse's neck. The hide was trembling beneath his fingers. "He won't stop until it's done," he said. "Neither will I." As the sun sank behind the ridge, painting the poisoned valley gold, the wind shifted again. Cooler this time, cleaner. It carried the smell of rain from far-off mountains, as if the land itself was trying to breathe again. Eli turned toward town. "Let's take him home, Sheriff." Wade nodded. "To justice?" "To whatever's left of it," Eli said. The two men walked, leading the limping horse down the long, glowing slope, while behind them the last of Denton's empire drowned in the very water he'd tried to steal. Somewhere, high above, the vulture folded both wings and drifted away, leaving the sky empty at last. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the kind that pressed on the ears or threatened to swallow men whole. It was the hollow quiet that came after something had broken and couldn't be put back together the same way again. By the time they reached Redemption Springs, the sheriff's rope hung loose at his side, Denton's wrists bound in front of him. His white shirt was streaked with the dust of his own ruin. Behind them, the gray horse limped through the orange twilight, every step deliberate, steady, alive. The townsfolk gathered as they passed, the same faces that had once turned away, now stepping forward in wordless understanding. Mothers held their children close. Men took off their hats. No one cheered. The wind through the mesquite did the talking. At the jailhouse, Wade shoved the door open and guided Denton inside. "Sit." The rich man obeyed for the first time in his life. Eli stayed outside, leaning against the hitching post. He could feel Silver Dust trembling behind him. The horse's skin twitched like it was trying to shake off pain itself. Eli pulled the ragged bandage loose and pressed fresh cloth to the wound. The bleeding had slowed, but each breath the animal took came with effort. "You've done enough," Eli whispered, his hand buried in the coarse mane. "Let me take it from here." Silver Dust blinked, eyes dark as storm water, and lowered his head into Eli's chest. The weight of it, solid, trusting, alive, broke something open inside the man. He didn't cry. Not exactly. But his breath came unsteady, shaking like the light on the horizon. Wade stepped out, closing the jail door softly behind him. "He'll stand trial in Santa Fe. I'll wire the marshal at dawn. They'll have to listen after what we found up north." Eli nodded but didn't look up. "Will they?" The sheriff sighed. "Maybe not the way we want, but the water's poisoned, the land's dying. You can't hide that under ledgers and smiles. Folks'll talk. That's how rot gets rooted out. Slow, but sure." The sound of hooves on stone made them both turn. A wagon was coming down the hill, driven by Dr. Brennan. The doctor climbed down quick, his coat flaring in the wind. "Got your telegram, Wade? Heard you found hell itself up there." "More or less," Wade said, "and it's bleeding into everything." Brennan's eyes went to Silver Dust immediately. "He needs rest. Shade, water. I'll do what I can, but he's run dry." Eli didn't argue. He helped lead the horse to the barn behind the livery. The air inside was cool, smelled of hay and salt. Brennan worked with quiet hands, cleaning the wound again, applying a poultice that stung enough to make Silverdust flinch but not pull away. "You ever think about miracles, Turner?" the doctor asked without looking up. "I used to," Eli said. "Then I learned miracles have teeth." Brennan smiled faintly. "Maybe. But every so often, one bites for the right reason." He patted the horse's neck, checked the pulse along his jaw, and said softly, "He's tougher than sense itself. If he makes it through tonight, he'll see another dawn." Eli leaned against a stall post, his body suddenly heavier than the world. "Then I'll stay right here until he does." Wade and Brennan exchanged a look, but said nothing. They left him to the quiet of the barn. Hours passed. The lamps burned low, the night wind whispering through gaps in the boards. Eli sat cross-legged in the straw, one hand resting against the horse's flank, feeling the slow rhythm of breath against his palm. For a while he let his mind drift, past the noise of trial and vengeance, back to the simple rhythm of hooves and sky, when a man's worth wasn't measured in land or gold, but in the way he kept his promises. And he'd made one now, to see this creature home, whatever that meant. Near midnight, the sound of the door creaking pulled him from his half-sleep. It wasn't Wade or Brennan. The figure that stepped in moved softer than either of them. A woman's voice, low and steady. "I heard what you did up there." Eli turned. The lamplight caught her face. Martha, the general storekeeper's widow. Her hair was tied back with a strip of burlap, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Didn't do it alone," Eli said. "You did enough," she replied. "The whole town's talking. Denton's name'll rot before he ever sees a courtroom. Maybe it's about time something honest grew in his place." Eli smiled a little, dry as river clay. "Honest things don't grow easy out here." She stepped closer, looking at Silverdust. "Maybe they do. You just have to bleed for them first." She set a small cloth bundle on the hay beside him. "Bread, coffee, for when he wakes." "Martha," Eli said quietly, "I don't know if he will." "Then drink it yourself," she said, and left without waiting for thanks. Eli watched the door swing shut, then looked back at the horse. "You hear that, old boy? They think we did something worth talking about." Silverdust didn't answer. He didn't have to. Outside, dawn began its slow climb, a pale edge over the mesa, brushing the sky with lavender. Brennan returned just before sunrise, his coat buttoned, eyes hollow from sleeplessness. He crouched beside the horse, checked his breathing, then looked at Eli. "He's holding," the doctor said softly, "but he's tired down to the soul." Eli nodded. "Ain't we all?" The doctor stood, adjusting his spectacles. "You should rest too. You look half dead yourself." "Half's enough," Eli said. Brennan smiled faintly and left him to it. When the first light touched the barn floor, Eli stirred. Silverdust's breathing had changed. Slower, deeper, almost peaceful. Eli laid his head against the horse's neck, listening. The sound was steady, alive, but fading like the last note of a hymn. "Don't you quit on me," Eli whispered. "We ain't done yet." The gelding's ear twitched. A long sigh moved through his body, warm and final. The silence after was unbearable. Eli sat there for a long time, one hand still resting where the heartbeat had been. The world outside the barn went on. The clatter of a bucket, a rooster calling, the far-off hammer of the blacksmith. Life refusing to stop. When Wade came in a few minutes later, he didn't have to ask. He just removed his hat and stood quiet. "I'll see to a place for him," the sheriff said softly. Eli nodded, unable to speak. His throat felt like gravel. They buried silver dust on a rise east of town, where the grass grew in thin green threads and the wind never stopped moving. Eli dug the last of the earth himself. Wade offered to help, but he shook his head. "This is my work," Eli said simply. When the grave was done, he placed the old brass compass, Clara's compass, on the mound, its surface dulled with age. He traced the words on its back with his thumb. "Find your way home." Wade rested a hand on his shoulder. "You did that, Eli, whether you know it or not." Eli looked out over the desert, where the line of the horizon shimmered in the heat. "Home ain't where you come from," he said. "It's where something still remembers you." The wind answered for both of them. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge, Eli stood at the grave again. The sky burned gold, then red, then that deep western violet that only lasted a heartbeat before fading to blue-black. He spoke softly, voice cracked but sure. "You gave me back something I thought I'd buried with her," he said. "And I'll spend the rest of my days making sure what you did ain't forgotten." When he turned back toward town, the wind carried a sound behind him, a creak, faint but real. The old windmill at Hollow Creek, miles away, had turned once more. Eli stopped in the road and listened. That sound, the groan of old wood, the steady rhythm of blades cutting through the dry wind, was something he hadn't heard in years. Back when the ranch still lived, back when the fences were mended and laughter still echoed across the yard. He'd thought the windmill gone quiet forever, a relic to mark what he'd lost. Now it turned again, slow and sure, as if the earth itself was remembering him. He closed his eyes and let the moment stretch. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying the scent of rain and cedar. Then he took a breath and kept walking. Redemption Springs had changed overnight. Folks moved different now, slower, softer, with a kind of shared understanding in their eyes. The poisoned water had scared them, but it also woke them. The land they'd nearly lost had started to mean something again. Outside the sheriff's office, children were filling barrels from a clean well, laughing as the buckets sloshed. Men worked the street with new planks for the sidewalks, fixing what the storm of greed had broken. No one said it out loud, but the town was rebuilding, not just boards and rails, but trust. Wade met Eli halfway down the street, his badge dull in the morning light. He handed over a folded piece of paper. "Came by the telegraph this morning. You ought to see it." Eli unfolded the note. The handwriting was familiar, tight, careful script that looked like it had been pressed into the page more than written. "Pa, heard what you did. Proud of you. Coming soon." Daniel Eli stared at the words, his heart caught somewhere between disbelief and relief. He's coming?" "Seems so," Wade said with a half-smile. "Word travels faster than horseflesh when it's good news. Folks talk about you like some kind of folktale now. The cowboy who stood against the rich man for a horse and a spring. I think your boy finally heard the echo." Eli folded the paper, tucking it carefully into his pocket. It wasn't for legend. It was for the land, for that horse. Wade's voice softened. "Sometimes that's the same thing, Eli." They walked together to the edge of town, where the hills broke into gold grass. The grave on the ridge was easy to spot now, a wooden post marking Silver Dust's rest, the brass compass glinting faintly in the sunlight. Wade stopped a few paces back, letting Eli go on alone. Eli crouched by the mound and brushed away the dust that had gathered overnight. "They'll be here soon," he said quietly. "You'd have liked him, Daniel. Same stubborn streak. His little girl's 3 now, named Clara after her grandmother. She'd have climbed on your back before you knew what happened." He laughed softly at the thought. Guess you got the last ride after all. The wind blew hard across the ridge, bending the grass flat, then letting it rise again. Eli looked up and saw the storm clouds rolling in from the west, thick and gray, heavy with the promise of real rain. The first in months. He stayed there until the first drops started to fall, pattering soft on the dirt. Then he turned and headed back down to town. By the time he reached the main street, folks were running out from the porches, faces lifted to the sky, arms wide to catch the rain. The dust turned dark underfoot, the smell of wet earth spreading like mercy itself. Laughter broke out, wild and grateful. Eli stepped under the eaves of the general store, watching. Martha spotted him and waved. "Looks like we finally got our miracle," she shouted over the downpour. He tipped his hat. "About time we earned one." The rain didn't stop. It came in steady sheets through the afternoon, filling the troughs, washing the last of the mercury from the streets, soaking into the ground like forgiveness. The sound of it was everywhere. On rooftops, on tin, on the old windmill creaking back to life. That night, the town gathered at the church again, but this time not for anger. For thanks. Wade stood at the front, his hat in his hands. "We ain't preachers," he said, "and none of us are saints, but sometimes the good Lord reminds us what still matters. The earth, the beasts that walk it, and the people who don't give up on either." He looked over the crowd and found Eli near the back. And sometimes he sends a man who remembers both. The murmured amens rolled through the room. Afterward, Eli stepped out into the wet night. The air was cool, the moon rising silver over the mesas. He started down the main street when a familiar sound stopped him. The slow, measured rhythm of hooves. A wagon was coming from the east road, wheels creaking, horses snorting softly. As it drew closer, Eli saw the driver stand, waving. "Pa!" "Daniel." Eli froze. The man who stepped down was older than the boy he remembered, but still carried that same fire in his eyes. Beside him, a woman climbed down, holding a small bundle wrapped in blue. The child peeked out, blinking at the rain, curls plastered to her forehead. For a long second, no one moved. Then Eli took a step forward. Daniel met him halfway. They didn't speak at first, just a long, rough embrace that said what words couldn't. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel smiled through the tears neither of them tried to hide. "Heard you saved a horse," he said. Eli shook his head. "No, he saved me." Daniel looked past him toward the ridge. "Is that where he rests?" "Yeah." "I'd like to see it," Daniel said. They walked together in the pale light of the rain-damp moon. The child rode on Daniel's shoulders, humming quietly, reaching out to catch the falling drops. At the top of the rise, Eli stopped and pointed. "Right there." The grave shimmered faintly under a pool of moonlight. The compass gleamed like an eye half open. The little girl slid down from her father's shoulders and toddled forward. She knelt by the mound, tiny fingers brushing the wet earth. "Horsey sleepin'?" she asked. Eli crouched beside her, smiling gently. "Yeah, sweetheart. He's restin' after a long ride." She nodded solemnly. "Good horse." "The best there ever was," Eli whispered. Daniel put a hand on his father's shoulder. "Come stay with us in Santa Fe. The clinic could use a man who knows the land like you do. You don't have to drift anymore." Eli looked down the slope at the town, lights glimmering through the mist. "Maybe," he said softly. "But I think I finally found where I belong." They stayed there until the moon climbed high, until the storm eased into quiet drizzle. The windmill at Hollow Creek turned steady now, each creak a heartbeat, each rotation a hymn. When they finally walked back down the hill, the desert smelled new again. The kind of smell a man could build a life on, And for the first time in decades, Eli Turner didn't feel lost. He felt found, by the land, by his kin, and by the memory of a horse who'd refused to leave him behind. The next morning broke clean and gold. The desert was still damp from the night's rain, every grain of sand catching light like glass. Redemption Springs looked softer now, edges blurred by mist rising off the ground. Smoke curled lazy from chimneys. The town, once cracked and divided, breathed like one living thing again. Eli sat on the porch of the livery barn with a tin cup of coffee warming his hands. Across the street, Martha was sweeping her storefront, while two kids splashed through puddles she'd just cleaned. He almost smiled at the sight. Wade came up from the jailhouse, hat tilted back, eyes clearer than Eli had ever seen them. "Marshall wired from Santa Fe," he said. "Denton'll stand trial next week. The evidence stuck, thanks to your sketches and my notes. Turns out greed don't wash clean, even with money." Eli nodded slowly. "Guess even the law can remember the truth once in a while." "Sometimes it needs a reminder," Wade said, sitting on the rail. "You planning on going to Santa Fe for the trial?" Eli sipped his coffee. "No, I've seen enough of Denton's face to last a lifetime. Besides, my son's here, my granddaughter. Think I'll stay where the ground don't shift under my feet." The sheriff grinned. "That's as close to settling down as I've ever heard from you." "Maybe the dust finally settled first," Eli said. From down the road came the sound of wheels, Daniel's wagon heading toward the edge of town. He waved from the driver's seat, Clara perched beside him, little hands gripping the reins with more confidence than sense. "We're heading out to the ridge," Daniel called. "Want to come?" Eli stood, tossing the last of his coffee into the dirt. "Wouldn't miss it." The road up to the ridge was still muddy, the kind that clung to boots and wheels alike, but the air was sweet. Wet sage, sun-warmed mesquite, and that faint metallic scent of life returning after long drought. Clara laughed every time the wagon hit a rut, and the sound of it rolled out over the land like something holy. At the top, the grave waited. Grass had already started to take root over the mound, green blades pushing through where nothing had grown for years. The compass still lay there, polished by rain. Clara jumped down before the wagon stopped moving. "Grandpa, he's still here," she said, pointing. Eli smiled, walking slower. "He ain't gone, sweetheart. Just resting somewhere he can still see the horizon." Daniel joined him, hat in his hands. "Pa, I was thinking. We could rebuild the ranch. Not like before. Smaller, smarter. Maybe make it a place that takes in horses, ones that have been worked near to death or cast off." Eli's throat tightened. "A refuge?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah. You and, me. Clara'll have more animals to fuss over than she knows what to do with." Eli looked at the ridge, the grave, the open sky beyond. The idea hung there like a sunrise, fragile but full of promise. "Silverdust would have liked that," he said softly. "He had a soft spot for the broken ones." Daniel smiled. "Runs in the family." They spent the rest of the morning working the ground beside the grave, driving in posts for a small fence, something simple, something that said this place was cared for. The little girl gathered wildflowers and tucked them between the slats, whispering stories to the horse she'd never met. By noon, the sun was high, warm but not cruel. Eli wiped the sweat from his brow and looked out across the valley. From up here you could see it all, the town, the windmill, the glimmer of water winding through the basin, life moving on. He took the compass from the grave and thumbed the engraving. "Find your way home." For the first time, he didn't feel like he needed the words. He slipped it into Clara's small hand. "What's this?" she asked. "A promise," Eli said, "that no matter where you go, you'll always find your way back. To the land, to family, to what's right. She looked at the compass like it was magic. Even if I get lost, he smiled, especially then. The wind picked up, combing through the grass, whistling soft through the new fence. Daniel tilted his head. You hear that? Eli listened. Far off, somewhere past the hills, came the rhythmic creak of the Hollow Creek windmill, turning steady in the wind. Yeah, Eli said. It's still talking. They packed up as the shadows grew long. Back down the hill, the wagon creaked, wheels cutting clean tracks through the drying mud. At the base of the ridge, Eli looked back one last time. The grave glowed gold in the last light, grass swaying around it, the windmill beyond spinning like time itself. That night, the three of them sat on the porch of the small cabin Daniel had rented near the edge of town. The stars came out slow, one by one, until the sky was full. Clara had fallen asleep on Eli's knee, her hair tangled, the compass clutched in her fist. Daniel spoke quietly. You ever think about what comes next? Eli looked up at the stars. Every day. Used to think it was the end of the road. Now I reckon it's just another trail. You sound like a man with peace, Daniel said. Eli chuckled. Peace ain't something you find. It's something you build. One choice, one act of kindness, one stubborn old horse at a time. They sat in silence after that. The only sound, the chirring of crickets and the slow turning of the windmill down the valley. When Eli finally rose, he laid the sleeping child gently in her mother's arms and stepped out into the yard. The night air was cool, brushing against his skin like a benediction. He turned his eyes toward the ridge, where the faint line of the grave blended into the stars. You did good, old friend, he murmured. You brought me home. A gust of wind stirred the dust at his feet, and for just a second, Eli could swear he heard the soft clop of hooves, the steady breath of a horse walking beside him. He didn't turn, didn't need to. Instead, he smiled into the dark. The windmill turned once more, steady and sure, and the desert whispered back, low, endless, and kind. If this story touched your heart, leave a word below. Sometimes all it takes is one voice to keep the wind turning. Just drop a simple 0 or 1 in the comments if you felt something. That's enough to let me know you're out there, still riding with us. And if you'd like to follow the trail for more stories of grit, mercy, and the bond between man and beast, hit subscribe. There's always another campfire waiting, and another tale worth hearing under these wide western skies.